I believe that Vice Admiral Holdo may be the worst written character of all time. She's definitely the worst Star Wars character ever, but why is that exactly? What is it about Admiral Holdo that's so insulting to the audience? I wanted to mention this in my last video about Hollywood being evil, but this character deserves a video all on her own. The issues surrounding this character are far too complex to add it as a footnote in a video about something else. Laura Dern is an incredible actress who has played a litany of incredible characters over the years. This video is not about her. This video is about Rian Johnson and the way that Disney used Laura Dern to push their narrative. But to describe why Admiral Holdo is such a terrible character, I have to explain what would have made her a really well-written character. I think that this is a classic case of studio interference and a giant script rewrite at the hands of Disney. And I'm pretty sure that I know exactly what that character was supposed to be in the original draft of the script. Laura Dern is an absolute veteran in the industry, and there's no way she would have agreed to play a character like this, knowing that this is how she was going to be portrayed. Admiral Holdo was always supposed to be a villain. Let me explain. Stories almost always have a character that's a form of a chameleon, and one of the most common versions of this chameleon is a shamed or humiliated character that either betrayed the heroes or failed them in a horrendous way. Like in Lord of the Rings, Grima Wormtongue works for Lord Sauron, the evil wizard. Wormtongue's role is to manipulate the king of Rohan, essentially usurping the power of the kingdom. In his final moments, as he realizes his guilt, he turns on Sauron, stabbing him in the back, losing his own life in the process. In Thor Ragnarok, this character is Scourge, the executioner. He sides with Hela, the villain, betraying the people of Asgard. He too, in his final moments, sacrifices his life to save the ship of Asgardians fleeing Hela, redeeming himself in the process. This type of humiliated and shamed character can only truly redeem themselves if they sacrifice their life in the process. It's important that these characters die in the process of redeeming themselves, because their implied motivation for doing it is that they can no longer live with the guilt of what they've done. If they simply had changed sides and become a good guy, then they wouldn't truly be redeemed, because they would have to live with that shame for the rest of their lives. There's actually a specific version of this trope that's often used in war films and war stories, depicting a humiliated commander who sacrifices themselves for getting hundreds of their own troops killed after making terrible decisions in their command. And if you look at Admiral Holdo as a character that should feel shame for screwing up so badly, if you look at her failures objectively and the way that military command would look down on her for her failures, then her final act as Admiral, ramming her ship into the enemy ship, should be seen as that moment of redemption. And we don't have to scratch very deep under the surface of her character to find that original trope. My belief is in the original draft of the script, Admiral Holdo was supposed to be perhaps even a man who had taken over for Princess Leia after she had fallen into a coma, and all of the distrust that our heroes show towards Admiral Holdo is supposed to be seen as justified. In the film, Admiral Holdo is presented to us as an antagonist. She even behaves antagonistically towards Poe. However, at the end of the film, we find out in the most awkward way possible that she was actually secretly a hero the entire time. So how do I think the original draft was written? Assuming that the events of the film play out essentially the same way, it's a bad thing that Admiral Holdo acts so closed off to the rest of the crew. This is perhaps their most dire moment in the entire history of the rebellion, and her role as commander should be to keep morale up by being transparent and and assuring everyone that they'll be alright as long as they follow her orders. It makes sense that she won't tell anybody what her plan is because they're worried about there being a mole in the crew. However, it makes no sense at all that she refuses to tell anyone that she even has a plan. She refuses to take morale into consideration at all. Our instinct as the audience is to assume that this means that she's incompetent and she's hiding the fact that she has no plan and she doesn't know what she's doing. She appears to make no changes throughout the entire runtime of the film, and her perceived inaction gets people killed over and over again as they lose ship after ship to the First Order. But what's worse is she refuses to even take counsel or take advice from the heroes, who seem to know more about what's going on around them than she does. Finn, who is a former stormtrooper, tells the audience that the First Order can only track one of the ships from the rebellion. The implication being that they're only tracking the lead ship, the ship that Laura Dern is commanding. All of the smaller support vessels slowly fall back and get destroyed as they run out of fuel. Running out of fuel being one of the ticking clock elements that's causing tension throughout the runtime. If Admiral Holdo was willing to listen to her own crew, then they could have formulated a plan around this issue. If Finn could have explained to her that the First Order was not tracking the support vessels, perhaps they could have transferred all of the fuel and all of the personnel to those support vessels and scattered them in multiple different directions, making it impossible for the First Order to track them all. Perhaps this was even a solution that was levied towards Admiral Holdo in the original draft of the script, but Admiral Holdo refused to give up the lead vessel out of pride of her command, a hubris of her character. But instead, in the final film, we watch each of those support vessels slowly fall back and get destroyed, killing their captains in the process. And these losses are never presented to the audience as a failure of Admiral Holdo for which she must feel shame. In fact, the film never addresses that. This would have added so much more impact to Finn and Rose's storyline. They were willing to break orders and run off on their own adventure to stop the First Order, but instead, nothing they do in the film has any impact on the story at all. It's like they're ghosts. They're not even really there. You could remove Finn and Rose's storyline from the entire film and it would not have affected the plot at all. It seemed like it was just an excuse to have some weird heartfelt message about saving animals, ironically employing the help of slave children in the process, which is just so awkward, when instead their storyline could have been about saving the slave children. Ah, you didn't think we'd notice that one, Disney, did ya? Finn and Rose instead end up running into the chameleon of the story, except he's also a terrible character because he's barely even a chameleon. We meet him in prison. He admits that he's a bad person. Finn and Rose catch him stealing. He admits that he has no loyalties because he thinks both the rebellion and the First Order are bad. So when he finally betrays them at the end of their storyline, it's not a surprise at all. Total bullshit. Admiral Holdo's final act as commander is to send the remaining crew in transport vessels to the surface of a planet in hopes that they can take refuge in an old rebel base. This was supposed to be done in secret so that those transport vessels wouldn't be noticed by the First Order fleet. However, the fleet notices because they look out their window and see it happening, and with their long-range weapons take out transport after transport, killing dozens more rebels. This too should be presented to the audience as a failure. This should be seen as Admiral Holdo's final failure as a commander. What she was holding close to her chest as her secret plan the entire film was was failing before our eyes. However, it's in this very moment that Princess Leia puts her hand on Poe's lap and explains to him, like he's a 5-year-old child, that Admiral Holdo was actually a secret badass the entire time, and she just wanted to keep her plan a secret because she cares more about hope and keeping light than appearing like a hero. And just as Leia finishes this sentence, Holdo kamikazes the ship into the First Order fleet. This particular moment is insulting to the audience because there is unresolved tension between Holdo and Poe that can only be resolved in 2 ways. One, where she finally talks to Poe and lets him in on the inner circle, where he admits that he was wrong not to trust her, and she admits that she was wrong not to include him in the plan. Or the second way that this resolves the tension is if she realizes that she is a total fuck up and in her shame sacrifices herself to save the remaining crew as their transports are landing on the surface. However, we don't get either of those moments. We get talked down to and told a version of events that simply does not match what we saw during the duration of the film. We are insulted. Laura Dern is insulted. Now, why would they change the script from such an obvious, perfect trope into something so confusing? In part, yes, this is because Hollywood refuses to write female characters with flaws. But I don't think that this is about women. I believe that this is propaganda that's meant to teach us that we're always supposed to trust our leadership, even when they act completely closed off and they make decisions that can be perceived as selfish or psychopathic, getting thousands of their own people killed in the process, and that we should never question that because they're our leaders. And as our leaders, they deserve to make those kinds of decisions. Like I said in my last video, fuck Disney, fuck Star Wars, and fuck Hollywood.